Hello guys and girls of the wonderful YouTube realm, how's it going? Hope you're having a wonderful Christmas holiday week. My name's Icy Volk and I just literally finished my third cup of coffee, which is sadly gone. It smells pretty damn amazing too. It was way better than the one that I had last week, that's for sure. That cup of coffee was horrible. It was just seriously bad. Not having that kind of coffee ever again. Trust me on that. So, as much as I'd like to babble on about coffee, which is my favorite drink, I'm here to discuss WildStar Online, which is clearly the video game that's making me hyperactive right now. It's not the coffee, guys. It's WildStar Online. So let's talk about the Engineer. It is one of the two redacted classes for the game, the other one being the Medic, the one that uses shock paddles to either heal allies or hurt enemies. I actually talked about the Medic last week, so if you want to know more about that class, check out the video. Otherwise, let's talk about the Engineer. What is the Engineer, guys? So before you listen to me babble about this class, I strongly suggest you check out the links that I have listed in the description below, because I am not the best person at explaining things. It is known by some of my followers. So I'm just telling you this right now. It's a warning. Go check out the links, because they will give you a clear idea of what the Engineer is. So without further ado, let's talk about the Engineer. So the Engineer is, he or she is a person, one of the 6 classes available for the game. It is the only class that actually uses pets. Mind blown. The Engineer uses a two-hander weapon. It's a rocket launcher or like a shotgun. It does a lot of damage. And the Engineer is basically this mid-range DPS class / tank class that can kite it can kite enemies to some extent. It's a very mobile class. It does a lot of sustained damage, and it mainly uses a launcher, a two-hander weapon that you use to annihilate enemies. Now, apart from the launcher, the Engineer uses bots. They are those mechanical creatures that you've seen in the DevSpeak video that walk around and protect the main player. There is a total of 4 bots available to the Engineer. They all have different purpose. One can restore a shield, or one can taunt and tank enemies for you. They're pretty nifty. And they're just like the second weapon that's being used by the Engineer. They're like a distraction to use when you fight enemies. They're very useful. And the third piece of gear that is available to the Engineer is the exosuit, which is also the Engineer's innate ability. It is also used to change stances, because as you all know, all tank classes have stances. They use those stances to either deal more damage or to be able to mitigate damage more effectively. The reason why healer classes don't have stances is because they have a stat that affects both healing output and damage output, so they don't really need stances, right? So the exosuit is this really cool ultimate ability, innate ability that the Engineer has. It is actually the coolest looking innate ability, in my opinion. It actually makes the Engineer look like a mech warrior. It's just so cool looking, and you can see it in the DevSpeak video. It is just the best thing ever. So the armor type that Engineers use is heavy armor, which can only mean one thing, and that is Engineers can be either tanks or DPS. Usually tanks use heavy armor to be able to mitigate damage more effectively, but Stalkers, which is a rogue class, they use medium armor. Why? Because they're able to avoid a lot of damage, so they don't really need heavy armor, since they can dodge a lot of enemy attacks. And so, and that's why the Engineer is more of like this guy that can take a lot of damage. He wades through the battlefield with his launcher and is kind of mobile, but not as mobile as you think the class might be. The roles that are available for the Engineer, as like I've said before, are DPS and tank, and there are 4 bots in total. I think I've said that already, but they're very useful, and I think they're very important for the player. If you want to be very effective in a fight, then you have to be able to use bots. And by the way, you can have up to 2 bots at a time instead of 1, which is kind of new. You haven't seen that in any other MMO. Usually pet classes can only have one pet at a time, but in the case of the engineer for WildStar, you can have 2 pets. And little side note, I think the engineer from Guild Wars 2 doesn't have any pets. Honestly, I feel like the engineer from WildStar is way cooler than the Guild Wars 2 one. That's just my opinion. And by the way, speaking of Guild Wars 2, I really regret spending money for that game. I mean, it was a really nice looking game, nice graphics. It had some interesting classes, but they weren't game-breaking classes. And I felt like overall the game was a Zerg fest. Like, the quests weren't even engaging. And I just feel like WildStar is going to win it for this year, for the upcoming year, for 2014. I feel like it's gonna compete WoW in terms of gameplay, and it's gonna be great. I really am digging the community for WildStar. It is mainly the thing that made me engaged into WildStar. So, let's go back to the engineer now. So, let's briefly mention the stream episode that was put out by WildStar Online. By the way, you should tune in to Carbine Studios' stream website, which is twitch.tv/WildStar. That's where they post all of their live gameplay shows for each of the classes. I really recommend you watch them. They're they're interesting, and the developers there are very informative about the classes that they have personally developed. So for the engineer stream episode, they had a lot of like solo content going on. They were showing us like ship hand mission, which is challenging solo content for players. So it's something that we haven't seen before in previous stream episodes. And other than that, we also saw some PvP content, 2v2s. Unfortunately, I think the engineer lost 2 times in a row or once. But speaking of the engineer, I think a lot of people have mixed feelings about the class. We don't know for sure if the engineer is going to be lackluster. Maybe it will, and hopefully the developers will balance the class out. But it feels like the engineer is behind in terms of damage and is not as good as maybe, I don't know, the Stalker or the Warrior. I don't know. But it seems like the class is good early game. We'll have to see once the game launches. Other than the PvP fights, we also had some dungeon content, and we finally saw the first dungeon for the Dominion side, which is called Kelvereth. And the developers were doing 2 boss fights, which both went pretty quickly, in my opinion. And I feel like engineer tanking is really good. It seems safe. And you can actually, mitigate damage to your bot and, prevent damage from being taken by the player, help out the healers this way. So that's pretty much what the stream episode, how it went. Let's actually talk about the main information on the engineer. So first of all, the engineer is a mid to long range class depending on the engineer's action set. While engineers are really good at sustain damage and survivability, they don't have as much CC as other classes do, like the Espers or Medics, and they have no gap closers, unfortunately. So that means you can't, get really close to the enemy or pull them towards you. You don't really need it since you have a lot of abilities that, abilities that do AoE damage and all of that. And on top of that, you have bots that do some damage for you. Unfortunately, engineers are not as bursty or spiky in terms of damage like Espers or Stalkers do. Espers and Stalkers do a lot of burst damage at the beginning or towards the end of a fight, whereas engineers do a lot of, they keep up with constant damage during most of a fight. Now, all engineer abilities are able to be cast while moving. Unfortunately, when you're casting these abilities, your movement speed is decreased by, it's decreased significantly. So there has to be some kind of balance there. You can be quite mobile as an engineer, but you can't move as quickly as you think you might. So that's that. To deal the most amount of damage, the developers have advised people to pop their eradication mode from their innate ability, which is the exosuit. So DPS engineers will want to activate their eradication mode to deal the most amount of damage in a raid environment or in a PvP environment. Doesn't matter. Eradication mode is best for DPS. Let's talk about the bots, which are the engineers' pets. So you can have up to 2 bots at a time instead of 1. You can't have more than 2, but you have about 4 available in total. 1 restores shields, 1 heals you, and there's 1 that tanks for you and taunts enemies, and there's another one that also, I don't remember what it exactly does, but they're all very different in terms of mechanics, in terms of what they can do on the battlefield. Bots are on a 15-second cooldown, so you can't just immediately recast them if they die. They are targetable, by the way. They are killable by enemy players or enemies, unlike medic probes. Probes for the medics are just little totems, like shaman totems from WoW, that you just place on your allies or enemies to do periodic damage or healing, but you can't really kill them, but you can detonate them whenever you want. Whereas engineer bots are killable. Bots are actually a little bit more effective than medic probes, but they can be destroyed at a certain point. My concern with bots is that I don't know if bot summons are instant casts or channeled spells, because if they're channeled spells, then that means that the engineer is going to be kind of lackluster in a raid environment. You can't really waste time on recasting a pet. You're going to have to want it to be an instant cast. So hopefully that will be the case for WildStar Online. Bot summons are part of the limited action set, so they don't have they're not separate from the from the limited action set, sorry. So they have to be part of your main action bar. Once summoned, the bot slot ability is switched out by the bot special ability, and bots can be cast while casting other abilities, so that means that bot summons are not on a global cooldown. Good. Now, the developers are still doing some raid testing to see how they can prevent engineer bots from being one-shotted by bosses, so that's a good piece of news. Engineers also have a ground-targeted go-to location option for their bots, so you can tell your bots where to go in order for the bots to avoid damage from enemies or bosses. So engineers, again, can only have 2 at a time, and bots, by the way, have 3 different AI behaviors. Just like in World of Warcraft, they can be either aggressive, defensive, or passive. And finally, let's talk about the tanking side of engineers. So engineer tanks are basically ranged tanks with lots of mitigation and bots for some kind of distraction. They can use their bots to their advantage and taunt enemies so that they can mitigate the damage to their bots, helping healers in this way. Because of their range, engineer tanks can pull mobs from a safer spot. So they're better at pulling mobs in comparison to stalker tanks or warrior tanks. And just like other tank classes, engineer tanks have 2 different stances, one for DPS, one for tanking. The DPS one is called eradication, while the tanking mode is called provocation. Now, the bonus you gain while being in your exosuit, which is your innate ability, for DPS mode grants you extra volatility, which is your class resource. By the way, oh god, I haven't mentioned volatility. It is your class resource. It is percentage based, and you basically generated by using builder abilities. And yeah, and you use volatility to unleash your finisher abilities. It's kind of a niche class resource. It's kind of weird. It doesn't feel like it impacts a lot, but it's your class resource. So it's called Volatility. And while you're in DPS mode, if you use your exosuit, the bonus you gain is extra volatility per second and damage addition to your attacks. The defensive bonus for the exosuit reduces incoming damage that starts out high and degrades slowly, and attacks against the engineer return damage, some portion of the damage back to the attacker. So that's kind of a nifty bonus. The exosuit, by the way, which is the innate ability, lasts for 20 seconds and is on a 2-minute cooldown. So you can use it quite often, about, maybe 4 or 5 times during a boss fight. And finally, engineers don't necessarily need to use the tanking bot to be able to tank effectively. They're still able to generate some kind of threat and maintain mitigation without using the bot. The bruiser bot, which is the tanking bot, just provides some kind of leverage, some protection and distraction, but otherwise it doesn't really affect the tanking side of the engineer. So now that we've talked about the tanking side of this class, let's mention some of the abilities that we've seen during the stream episode. I only have a few of them. Most of them are assault abilities, some support ones, and some utility ones as well. So the first one that I saw was called Pulse Blast. It's your builder ability. It's 25 meters long. You use it to mainly generate volatility. Electrocute is an ability that uses volatility. It's 25 meters long. It's a lined ability, and it's an instant channeled ability, so it does periodic damage as the spell is being channeled. Quick Burst is a cone-shaped 25-meter long ability. Don't know if this one uses volatility, but it's an instant ability. It does a lot of damage. We have the Artillery bot, which is the DPS bot. So it does periodic damage It helps you get enemies down pretty quickly. We have Energy Augur, which is a 30-meter long ability that leaves an AoE field that does damage to enemies that walk over it. We have Bolt Caster, which is a 30-meter long lined ability. It is a charge ability, and it increases the amount of beams after each charge. So, like the first charge will have one line, one beam that you will see on the ground, one telegraph. Then you'll see 3 of those lines after the second one, and 5 lines after the final charge. So that's pretty cool. We finally have Shock Pulse, which is a 25-meter long ability. It fires 3 narrow beams. Each beam hits individually, and if you can get an enemy within all of those beams, then it does all the damage, and it also snares targets. So let's mention some of the support abilities now. The first one is called the Bruiser bot, which is your tanking bot. It will interrupt mobs and also taunt them if you want to like mitigate the damage to the bot. It's a 25-meter long. It's a summon ability, and it goes on a 15-second cooldown. We have Flat Cannon, which is a 20-meter long cone-shaped ability. It's a basic attack. It's also a charge attack, and you channel it for a bit after you charge it. We have Unsteady Miasma, which is also called Give 'em the Gas. It's a 25-meter long lined ability, which explodes at the end of the line, and it leaves an AoE field that debuffs the enemy's accuracy. So that's a good ability to use when you're in PvP. If you want to like debuff an enemy and take less damage from them, then you want to definitely use this kind of ability. We have Bioshell, which is a 30-meter long lined ability with a circled tip at the very end of that line. And the attack explodes at the end of the line once you're done casting the ability, and it boosts your technology resistance. Technology is a stat that's being used by engineers and medics, I believe. I don't know if there's a third class that uses it, but technology is one of the stats that... I think it's like the type of spell damage. I don't exactly remember. Next up, we have Particle Ejector, which is a 15-meter long cone-shaped ability. It's similar to Electrocute, the one from the Assault list of abilities, and it requires volatility. So the Flat Cannon is like your basic attack that you use to generate volatility for the support side, and then you'll want to use Particle Ejector to like do some burst damage for the support side. And then we only have some information on, we have like 3 spells that we know about for the utility side. We have Recursive Matrix, which is an aura around you that you cast to increase your defensive capabilities of yourself, for yourself, and nearby allies that are standing in that aura. We have Repair Bot, which basically heals ally shields on command. It boosts ally shields, very useful for tanking, for reducing incoming damage on yourself and allies. We also have Diminisher Bot, which I don't know what it exactly does, but I think it reduces damage taken. Might be that. Or it might just be able to heal your health pool instead of your shield, like the repair bot does. And finally, we have Obstruct Vision, which is a 10-meter radius, a circle-shaped ability that surrounds you, and it's basically used to blind your enemy. And blind status will basically disorient enemies, so it will make them walk around, and they won't be able to use their spells and all. Really good for PvP and for when you're taking a lot of mobs at a time. So these were all of the abilities that were mentioned or shown during the stream episode. If you want to know more about the rest of the spells, you can definitely search them out on some websites like ws.base.com, I think, or ws/base.com. That's where you'll find all of the available abilities. That's pretty much it about the Engineer. It's a really cool class, very unconventional. It is the only pet class that uses pets. And I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. Not sure how it's going to perform in battle, if it's going to match other classes in terms of damage or survivability. It might be, I feel like the class might be a little slow at first, at the very few stages of the game, but maybe once the developers balance it out, maybe it'll be better at what it does. But I feel like the best tanks right now are, of course, the Stalkers and the Warrior, and the Warrior is actually the best tank all around in almost any situation. The Stalker is good for like avoiding a lot of telegraphs and doing more damage than the Warrior tank. So that's my opinion on the Engineer. If you want to know more about the other classes, definitely check out the other videos. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Make sure to check out the links that I have provided in the description. And thank you for watching this episode of the WildStar Class Recaps. Make sure to tune in for next week for the Stalker recap. Thank you for watching again, and I'll see you next time, folks. Goodbye.